Imagine being in a land where faith has almost vanished, and idol worship has taken over every corner of society. Suddenly, like a flash of lightning in the dark, the prophet Elijah emerges, a solitary figure against an entire kingdom lost in corruption. Under the reign of King Ahab and the cunning Queen Jezebel, Israel had forgotten the true God, instead turning to Baal and Asherah, gods of rain and fertility brought by Jezebel herself. In a time when divine miracles were as tangible as the air we breathe, Elijah's mission was clear: to spark a spiritual revolution and bring the people back to their true faith. Against overwhelming odds, Elijah stood alone, a beacon of truth in a land consumed by false beliefs. This is not merely a story of confronting idols, it's a story of rekindling a forgotten flame of faith, a flame that almost disappeared. In this video, we'll explore Elijah's incredible life, his fearless challenge to idolatry, and the miracles that followed. Before we continue, I want to ask you to leave a like on the video to support us. And if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel and also click the notification bell. God bless you. In a land filled with idol worship, Elijah the prophet appeared like a sudden flash of light. Israel, under the corrupt rule of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, had turned away from God. King Ahab was the 7th king of Israel, ruling in the 9th century before Christ. He was known for his weak character and easily being influenced by his wife, Jezebel, rather than following God. Queen Jezebel was a Phoenician princess from the city of Sidon. Jezebel came to Israel as part of a political alliance between her father, King Ethbaal of Sidon, and King Ahab of Israel. This marriage was intended to strengthen ties between Israel and Phoenicia, ensuring mutual benefits such as trade and military support. However, along with Jezebel came her religious beliefs and practices, which deeply influenced Ahab and led to widespread idolatry in Israel. Phoenicia was an ancient civilization located along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, in what is now modern-day Lebanon. It was known for its powerful maritime trade and advanced seafaring abilities. Sidon, one of its major cities, was a key hub of commerce and culture. The Phoenicians were polytheistic, worshipping many gods, and it was from this background that Jezebel brought the worship of Baal and Asherah into Israel. She brought with her the worship of Baal, a god of rain and fertility, and Asherah, a goddess of fertility and motherhood. Jezebel was determined to replace the worship of the true God with these foreign gods. She ruthlessly persecuted the prophets of God, trying to silence anyone who stood against her efforts to spread idolatry and strengthen her influence over the kingdom. The king's alliance with Baal and Asherah, gods believed to control rain and fertility, caused Israel to almost forget their faith in the one true God. People were drawn in by promises of easy blessings through pagan rituals, and the sacred traditions were nearly forgotten. But Elijah did not stay silent. God gave him a bold mission, and he was ready to stand up for what was right. It wasn't about recognition. It was about bringing true faith back to a people who had nearly forgotten their God. To the eyes of the people, Elijah was no ordinary man. His words were like thunder, each one carrying weight, each phrase striking fear into the hearts of the idol worshippers. His message was simple yet powerful: return to God or face judgment. God had given Elijah a clear mission: to call the people of Israel back to their covenant with him. This covenant was made centuries earlier at Mount Sinai, where the ancestors of Israel pledged to follow God's commandments and be his chosen people. Elijah preached with a fierce and unyielding spirit, often confronting the people publicly and challenging their allegiance to Baal. He emphasized the importance of loyalty to God and condemned the worship of false idols, demanding repentance. God spoke to Elijah in different ways, sometimes through direct words and other times through visions or even angels. One of the most profound moments was when God spoke to Elijah on Mount Horeb in a deeply meaningful way. After Elijah arrived at the mountain, he experienced a series of powerful natural events: a mighty wind that shattered rocks, an earthquake that shook the ground, and a fire that blazed intensely. However, God was not in any of these dramatic events. Instead, God revealed himself through a gentle whisper, a soft and quiet voice that required Elijah to be still and attentive. This moment demonstrated that God's presence is often found not in grand displays of power, but in the subtle and quiet moments of our lives, emphasizing that His guidance can come in the most unexpected ways. Elijah's voice alone was enough to bring tension among Israel's prophets, because his presence was a powerful reminder of this ancient covenant. Despite generations of disobedience, the covenant still held immense spiritual significance. Elijah stood as a living symbol of that bond, directly challenging the false prophets who had led the people astray. His presence stirred deep emotions, a mix of fear, guilt, and hope, as it called the people back to the promises made long ago. This confrontation was no light matter. Elijah was about to set the stage for a spiritual revolution. Elijah's authority and unbreakable faith didn't just earn him respect, it earned him powerful enemies. Jezebel, with her unwavering support for the prophets of Baal, was determined to eliminate any threat to her influence over Israel. The prophets of Baal were religious leaders dedicated to serving Baal, who was considered the Canaanite god of rain, fertility, and agriculture. These prophets held significant influence over the people as they performed rituals and sacrifices, which often included elaborate ceremonies meant to invoke Baal's favor for good harvests and prosperity. Their practices sometimes involved extreme acts, including self-mutilation, to demonstrate devotion and persuade Baal to respond. Jezebel, determined to establish Baal worship as the dominant religion in Israel, provided strong support to these prophets, using them as tools to undermine the worship of the one true God and replace it with her own preferred system of belief. She aggressively pursued her agenda, launching a campaign to hunt down and kill God's prophets, silencing anyone who stood in her way. Elijah, however, remained undeterred by the danger. His mission was not about personal safety, but about fulfilling God's command to lead Israel back to the one true God. He understood the importance of restoring the people's faith, and he was willing to face any threat to accomplish this divine purpose. Elijah's courageous stand against the overwhelming power of the monarchy made him a symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression, a beacon of hope for anyone who has faced seemingly insurmountable challenges. Imagine a single man standing against hundreds, boldly proclaiming his message as the sole bearer of truth in a kingdom that had lost its way. The people's faith at that time was weak and confused. Many had turned away from God, swayed by the influence of Queen Jezebel and the promises of prosperity from the prophets of Baal. Their devotion to God had become lukewarm, replaced by participation in pagan rituals and sacrifices that offered easy blessings. Elijah didn't hide, and he didn't waver. His heart burned with devotion, and his words reached deep into the hearts of those who heard him. He saw the people he cared for being misled by empty promises and meaningless rituals, far from the God who loved them first. Elijah's mission wasn't just about ending idol worship. It was about bringing the people's hearts back to God, reminding them of their true identity and to whom they truly belonged. His story demonstrates that even one person, empowered by faith, can inspire change and ignite a spiritual movement. So, here stands Elijah, a prophet with no patience for half-hearted loyalty, ready to confront a kingdom soaked in idolatry. His journey begins in a land lost in its ways, under the reign of a king who has lost his path. But what lies ahead for Elijah is more than confrontation. It's a divine mission that would challenge every belief and tradition of his people, showing that God's power doesn't bow to kings or idols. Elijah's journey was one of divine provision, with miracles that left Israel in awe. His first encounter with God's provision came after he declared a drought upon Israel. This drought wasn't just any punishment, it was a direct response to the people's misplaced faith in Baal, the so-called god of rain and fertility. Baal was believed to control the weather and ensure agricultural prosperity, so a drought was a direct challenge to his supposed power. By withholding rain for several years, God was showing that Baal had no real authority over nature, and that the true God of Israel was the one who controlled all creation. The drought was not only a punishment, but also a demonstration to the people that their worship of Baal was futile, and only God had the power to bring rain and sustain life. During this drought, God led Elijah to the Cherith ravine, a remote and desolate place where Elijah might have seemed completely alone, yet God's presence was always with him. In this hidden spot, God provided for Elijah in an extraordinary way. Ravens, which are necrophagous birds, meaning they usually feed on dead animals, came to bring him bread and meat, sustaining him daily. This act of provision defied the natural order and human logic, as these scavenger birds were used to bring life-giving food rather than consuming it. It demonstrated that God's care for his people transcends all boundaries and limitations, using even the most unlikely means to provide for his faithful servant. God had previously spoken to Elijah, instructing him to declare a drought upon Israel as a judgment for their idolatry, and assured Elijah that he would sustain him throughout this difficult time. As Elijah obeyed, his life became a testament to how God's provision often shows up in unexpected forms. Think about it. Ravens, scavenger birds by nature, brought food daily to the prophet, obeying God's command. For Israel, known for its reverence of the clean and unclean in the law, God's use of these birds was a statement that his ways aren't limited by human standards. Imagine the scene. Elijah waiting patiently, his faith renewed with every meal, knowing that each visit from the ravens meant God's continued care over his life. Elijah's journey shows that when God calls us, he also provides, even when the source seems impossible. When the brook at Cherith finally dried up, God spoke to Elijah again, instructing him to embark on yet another journey of faith. The brook at Cherith was a small stream that provided water for Elijah during the drought. It was located east of the Jordan River, in a secluded area where Elijah could be hidden from those who sought to harm him. The brook symbolized God's provision and care during a time of scarcity, offering Elijah sustenance when there was no rain in the land. Its drying up marked the end of one phase of God's provision and the beginning of a new test of Elijah's faith. This time, he directed Elijah to Zarephath, a town located outside of Israel, deep in the heart of Baal-worshipping territory in Phoenicia. This was a surprising choice, as Zarephath was not part of God's chosen land, but it showed that God's power and compassion extend beyond borders. Elijah's provision would not come from wealthy townsfolk or those of influence, but from a poor widow who was struggling to survive. When Elijah arrived, he found the widow gathering sticks to prepare what she believed would be her last meal for herself and her son before they died of hunger. Despite her dire situation, Elijah asked her for food and water. Remarkably, by trusting Elijah and obeying his request, the widow experienced a miraculous provision from God. Her small supply of flour and oil, which she thought would only be enough for one final meal, never ran out throughout the entire drought. This event is described in 1 Kings, chapter 17, verses 8 to 16. Every day, there was enough flour and oil to sustain her, her son, and Elijah, even though it seemed impossible. This miracle showed God's power to provide abundantly, even in the midst of scarcity, and highlighted the importance of faith and obedience in times of dire need. Elijah's arrival turned her despair into hope. In this foreign town, God's miraculous provision wasn't only for his prophet, but also for a widow and her son, showing that his compassion knows no boundaries and can reach anyone, anywhere, regardless of their social status or background. Through Elijah's faith, Israel witnessed how God could sustain his people even during the most difficult trials. After Elijah declared a drought, God provided for him in unexpected ways. First, he sent Elijah to the Cherith ravine, where ravens brought him bread and meat every day. When the brook eventually dried up, God instructed Elijah to go to Zarephath, where a poor widow took him in. Though she only had enough flour and oil for one last meal, God miraculously ensured that her supplies never ran out. Elijah's reliance on God's provision showed Israel that true security comes not from wealth or power, but from trusting in God's care and faithfulness. But as Elijah's story unfolds, he faces new challenges that require not only unwavering faith in God's provision, but also the courage to confront the powerful forces of idolatry head-on. This next chapter will take Elijah to Mount Carmel, where he will stand alone against the hundreds of prophets of Baal. It is here that his faith transforms from mere survival into a bold testimony that will challenge and inspire an entire nation, proving once and for all who the true God of Israel is. Elijah's showdown on Mount Carmel stands as one of the Bible's most dramatic and powerful moments. vividly depicting the struggle between true faith and idolatry. At a time when Israel's faith had grown weak and the people had largely turned away from God, Elijah understood that only a powerful demonstration of God's might could bring them back. He boldly challenged King Ahab to gather all of Israel, including the 450 prophets of Baal, for a decisive confrontation on Mount Carmel. Elijah proposed a challenge to prove who the true God was. Both he and the prophets of Baal would prepare a sacrifice, but neither would set fire to it. Instead, they would each call upon their respective gods, and the one who answered with fire would be recognized as the true God. This dramatic challenge would leave no doubt in the minds of the people about who held real power. This was no ordinary mountain. It was considered a sacred place for Baal worship, believed to be Baal's stronghold. By choosing this location, Elijah deliberately positioned himself in the heart of enemy territory, showing immense courage and faith. It was a powerful statement that God's authority extended even to places claimed by false gods, proving that God's power could not be confined or challenged by idols. This confrontation would not only test the faith of the people, but also serve as a turning point in Israel's spiritual history. When the prophets of Baal began their rituals, they called out to their God from morning till noon, pleading for fire to consume their sacrifice. They danced around the altar, shouted, and performed elaborate rituals, but no answer came. Silence reigned, and their God remained absent. Elijah watched with a mix of sorrow and determination, knowing that this display would expose the falsehood of Baal worship. As the prophets became more frantic, Elijah began to taunt them, suggesting that Baal might be deep in thought, busy, traveling, or perhaps even sleeping and needing to be awakened. This was not merely mockery. It was a powerful demonstration of the futility of their idolatry. The prophets of Baal, in their desperation, resorted to self-mutilation, cutting themselves until their blood flowed, hoping to provoke a response from their God. Despite their extreme actions, no fire came, and Baal remained silent, leaving the people of Israel to witness firsthand the powerlessness of the God they had been worshipping. At the height of the day, Elijah stepped forward, calling the people close to witness a different kind of prayer. He rebuilt the altar of the Lord with 12 stones, each representing one tribe of Israel, a deliberate act to remind them of their covenant with God. Elijah didn't stop there. He ordered 12 jars of water poured over the sacrifice, drenching the altar and making the challenge even more formidable. This wasn't merely about proving power, it was about proving faith. Elijah's actions showed Israel that when you rely on God, nothing, not even water-drenched wood, can hinder his will. Then, Elijah prayed a simple yet profound prayer. Unlike the prophets of Baal, who had screamed, danced, and even cut themselves to gain their God's attention, Elijah calmly and humbly asked God to reveal himself to Israel. In response to Elijah's sincere plea, God answered with a dramatic display of power. Fire came down from heaven and consumed not only the offering but also the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. This miraculous event left no doubt about who was the true God. The people were overwhelmed by what they had witnessed and fell prostrate and crying, "The Lord, He is God." This powerful demonstration brought the people of Israel back to the reality of God's unmatched power and presence, igniting a reverent fear and awe that had long been forgotten. It was a pivotal moment that re-established God's authority in Israel and exposed the emptiness of idol worship. With victory in hand, Elijah ordered the people of Israel to seize and execute the prophets of Baal, ensuring that the influences of idolatry were removed from the nation. This decisive action was not just about eliminating false prophets. It was a necessary step to cleanse the nation and re-establish the worship of the true God. However, this triumph soon led to an unexpected challenge for Elijah. Queen Jezebel, enraged by the death of her prophets, vowed to kill him. Elijah, who had stood fearlessly on Mount Carmel, now found himself fleeing for his life into the wilderness. This sudden shift reveals a vulnerable side of Elijah, showing that even the boldest prophets are not immune to fear and exhaustion. His journey into the wilderness would become a profound encounter with God, one that would test his faith and reshape his understanding of divine strength. Following the Mount Carmel victory, Elijah faced an unexpected and fierce threat. Queen Jezebel, furious over the defeat of her prophets, vowed to kill him. This intense opposition shattered Elijah's spirit, leading him to flee into the wilderness. Here was a prophet who had just demonstrated God's power before hundreds of idolaters by calling fire from heaven, yet now he found himself running for his life, overwhelmed by fear. The wilderness, often seen as a place of testing and isolation, became Elijah's refuge. Exhausted and feeling utterly alone, he sat under a solitary broom tree and prayed to God, asking to be freed from his struggles, even expressing a desire to die. Elijah's plea was heartfelt and desperate. He felt that his efforts had been in vain and that he was the only one left who remained faithful to God. In his exhaustion, he wanted an end to his suffering, feeling that he could no longer endure the challenges before him. But God's response to Elijah's despair was unexpected. Instead of rebuking him, God sent an angel to provide bread and water, urging Elijah to eat. The angel visited Elijah twice, ensuring he had the strength to continue his journey. This act of kindness showed that God's presence wasn't only in powerful miracles, but also in the quiet moments of care. The angel's visit strengthened Elijah, reminding him that he was still part of God's plan and had a purpose to fulfill. This event is described in 1 Kings, chapter 19, verses 5 to 8. This small yet profound act pointed to a greater truth. God's provision doesn't cease in moments of weakness. Rather, it becomes even more personal and nurturing. With renewed strength, Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, the very place where Moses had once encountered God about 600 years earlier. This journey wasn't random. It was a return to the sacred space where God had revealed his covenant to Israel. Alone in a cave, Elijah poured out his heart, expressing his feelings of isolation and his belief that he was the last true prophet in Israel. God, however, saw beyond Elijah's despair, preparing him for a deeper encounter that would change his perspective entirely. As Elijah stood on the mountain, he experienced a mighty wind that was so powerful it shattered rocks. This wind occurred as Elijah waited for God's presence, but God was not in the wind. Then, an earthquake shook the ground beneath Elijah, followed by an intense fire. But again, God was not in these dramatic events. All of these forces happened while Elijah was on the mountain, each one seemingly worthy of being the way God would reveal himself. However, after these powerful displays, God finally spoke to Elijah through a gentle whisper, a soft and subtle sound that required Elijah to be completely still and attentive to hear. In that whisper, God spoke to Elijah, asking, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah expressed his feelings of loneliness and despair, believing he was the only prophet left who remained faithful. God responded by giving him instructions to anoint Hazael as king of Aram, Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha as his prophetic successor. God also reassured Elijah that there were still 7,000 people in Israel who had not bowed to Baal, showing him that he was not alone. This moment showed Elijah that God's power is not always in grand or dramatic signs, but can also be found in the quiet and tender moments. The gentle whisper reminded Elijah that God's presence is just as real in the intimate and personal moments as in the miraculous, teaching him that divine guidance often comes in simple and unexpected ways. With this revelation, Elijah's faith was renewed, but his journey was far from over. He would soon pass his prophetic mantle to Elisha, ensuring that God's mission in Israel would continue. What lay ahead for Elijah wasn't just an ending but a powerful legacy to carry forward. After his transformative experience on Mount Horeb, where God spoke to him in a gentle whisper, Elijah was given a clear mission: to anoint new leaders and, most importantly, to find his successor. God instructed Elijah to seek out Elisha, who was working as a farmer, plowing his family's field with 12 yoke of oxen. This event is recorded in 1 Kings, chapter 19, verses 15 to 21. Elijah's journey led him to Abel-Meholah, where Elisha lived. When Elijah found Elisha, he walked up to him and placed his cloak over Elisha's shoulders. This symbolic act signified the transfer of the prophetic mantle and God's calling for Elisha to follow Elijah. Elijah did not say much, but his action spoke volumes, and Elisha understood the gravity of the gesture. This wasn't just a change in profession, it was a divine calling that required Elisha to leave behind everything he knew. In response, Elisha slaughtered his oxen and used the wooden plow to cook the meat, offering a farewell feast to his family and friends. This act was a powerful declaration that he was leaving his old life behind entirely, fully dedicating himself to God's service and signaling the continuation of God's work through a new generation. Elisha's response was immediate and wholehearted. Though he asked to say goodbye to his family, he did so in a profound way, sacrificing his oxen and using his plowing equipment, a wooden plow, which was an essential tool for breaking up soil and preparing fields for planting, as fuel for a farewell feast. This act symbolized Elisha's complete departure from his past life as a farmer, demonstrating his full commitment to follow Elijah and serve God. This act was Elisha's way of leaving his past life behind entirely. It was a declaration that he was ready to follow Elijah and embrace his calling without hesitation or regret. For Elisha, this wasn't a casual decision, it was a covenant with God, a commitment to carry on Elijah's legacy in faith and obedience. As Elijah mentored Elisha, the two shared many significant experiences that prepared the younger prophet for the responsibility that lay ahead. Elijah led Elisha through encounters with kings, showing him firsthand the courage required to deliver God's messages to those in power. Elisha also witnessed divine miracles, such as the parting of the Jordan River and the calling down of fire from heaven, which demonstrated God's power and the importance of unwavering faith. Through these experiences, Elisha learned the heavy responsibilities and challenges that came with being a prophet in Israel. This mentorship was crucial, as Elijah imparted both wisdom and strength, knowing that Elisha would need these qualities to face the resistance of a rebellious nation. Together, they formed a bond that went beyond that of teacher and student. They became kindred spirits, united in their devotion to serving God. When Elijah's time on earth neared its end, Elisha made a bold request to inherit a double portion of Elijah's spirit. In the culture of ancient Israel, a double portion was the inheritance given to the firstborn son, symbolizing both privilege and responsibility. By asking for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, Elisha was not seeking personal glory or power. Instead, he was expressing his desire to carry on Elijah's prophetic mission with even greater strength and commitment. Elisha understood the weight of the prophetic role and wanted the spiritual strength needed to fulfill it. His dedication and humility pleased Elijah, who responded by leaving the matter in God's hands, saying, "You have asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise it will not." 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 10. Elijah trusted that this divine calling would be fulfilled according to God's will. Their bond was strengthened in these final moments as Elijah prepared to depart, and Elisha readied himself to step into the prophetic role, marking the beginning of Elisha's profound journey as a prophet. As the time for Elijah's departure approached, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Elisha knew that what lay ahead would not only change his life, but would also transform the spiritual landscape of Israel. Soon, a powerful and miraculous event would unfold, setting a foundation for the continuation of God's work through the next generation. The moment of Elijah's departure was one of the most awe-inspiring events in the Bible. As Elijah and Elisha traveled together, Elijah knew that his time on earth was coming to an end. They stopped at significant places, Gilgal, Bethel, and Jericho, as if Elijah was saying farewell to the land and people he had served so faithfully. At each stop, Elijah encouraged Elisha to stay behind, but Elisha, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen, refused to leave his mentor's side. Their journey eventually led them to the Jordan River. When they reached the Jordan River, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the left and right, allowing both Elijah and Elisha to cross on dry ground. This final miracle is described in 2 Kings and chapter 2 towns, verses 8 to 9. And it echoed the past acts of God, such as the parting of the Red Sea by Moses, demonstrating that God's power was still with Elijah even in his final moments. On the other side of the Jordan, Elijah asked Elisha what he desired before his departure. Elisha's response was profound. He requested a double portion of Elijah's spirit, symbolizing both his respect and his determination to carry on Elijah's legacy with even greater power. This request wasn't merely for personal gain. It was a commitment to continue God's work and an acknowledgement of the daunting task ahead. Elijah responded by stating that if Elisha witnessed his departure, his wish would be granted. It was a moment of trust and final blessing between the two prophets. Then came the miraculous climax. A chariot of fire, accompanied by horses of fire, suddenly appeared and separated Elijah from Elisha. As the chariot and horses blazed between them, Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. This was a breathtaking and awe-inspiring event, leaving Elisha behind, filled with both reverence and a deep sense of loss for his mentor. This was not just a simple departure. It was a visible testimony of God's favor upon Elijah, validating his life's work and faithfulness to God. Elijah's ascension in the fiery chariot demonstrated God's immense power and presence, making Elijah one of the few individuals in biblical history to enter heaven without experiencing death. For Elisha, witnessing this extraordinary event was a clear sign that he was now called to step into his prophetic role with full confidence, carrying forward the mission Elijah had begun. Elisha's reaction was both grief-stricken and determined. He tore his own clothes in mourning, symbolizing the end of an era. Picking up Elijah's fallen cloak, he now bore the physical and spiritual mark of his calling. Crossing the Jordan once more, this time using the cloak as Elijah had, Elisha demonstrated that he now carried the same power. Witnessing the event of the chariot of fire not only granted him his double portion, but also sealed his place as Elijah's successor. The chariot of fire was more than an extraordinary sight. It served as a divine message to Israel and a warning to its kings. It reminded the people of God's authority and sovereignty, even over life and death. Elijah's fiery departure left a legacy that Elisha would carry forward, marking a new chapter filled with miracles, faith, and the continuation of God's purpose. Elijah's life offers a profound example of unwavering faith and absolute commitment to God's call. Through his journey, he demonstrated how faith could spark monumental change, even in the face of a nation swayed by idolatry and corruption. Elijah's courage as he confronted the powerful, such as King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, was rooted not in pride, but in a deep conviction of God's justice and holiness. This conviction was not about self-righteousness, but about bringing God's people back to true worship. Elijah's journey was also marked by dependence on divine provision, from being fed by ravens during the drought to the miracle of endless flour and oil for the widow in Zarephath. Elijah's life showed how God provides, even when resources seem impossible. Each miracle served as a testament to God's care for those who rely entirely on him. For the widow, sharing her last meal with Elijah was a test of faith, but in doing so she witnessed God's hand in ways she could never have anticipated. The prophet's life was an open demonstration of the power of prayer. Elijah's prayer for fire on Mount Carmel wasn't just a plea for a miracle. It was a bold declaration of God's supremacy over all false gods. This moment stood as a powerful example of how genuine prayer is grounded in an understanding of God's will and purposes. Elijah's prayers consistently mirrored his belief in God's promises, showing us that prayer is not about bending God's will to ours, but aligning our hearts with his. In moments of despair, Elijah showed his humanity, such as when he fled into the wilderness after Jezebel's threats. God met him there, not in fire or earthquake, but in a gentle whisper, reminding Elijah and us that divine guidance often comes quietly. This encounter showed that God's presence is often more profound in stillness than in the noise of life. Elijah's experience teaches us that even in our lowest moments, we are not alone. God's presence is ever near, whispering encouragement and direction. Through Elijah's life and legacy, we are encouraged to hold fast to faith, especially in challenging times. His story resonates as a reminder that while the path of obedience may be difficult, God's purpose remains steadfast. The prophet's journey invites us to trust in God's provision, to seek his guidance in quietness, and to carry forward a spirit of faith that endures, leading to blessings beyond our understanding. And with this, Elisha continued Elijah's legacy, performing miracles and guiding the people of Israel with the same spirit and determination that his mentor had shown, ensuring that the mission of turning Israel's heart back to God lived on. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to keep following more biblical stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us, and we want to hear your opinions and suggestions. May God bless you.